It is another one of those days where, wow, what do I have to do today? Let's see. Brian, you're going to have to sit down. You're going to have to talk about some Star Trek for a little while. Oh, man. Really, I mean, that's torturous. It's torture. Who would do that to anybody? Like, really? Why would you say, hey, no, you need to sit down and talk about Star Trek? Oh, kidding, of course. The Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Savzu. Here with you, the Rated R Radio Star. That's always my favorite one, actually. This is something that I said we would be doing throughout the month of May, which is a series of Sovryn Top 8s. We did the first one, which was the Top 8 spaceships of all time. Then we did the Top 8 starfighters of all time. And then I said we would have to do Star Wars and Star Trek as their own episodes, their own top 8s as far as vessels go. And this has been a lot of fun. People have enjoyed these. And so we're doing our Star Trek ships top 8. And this could include shuttles. It could include all that stuff, any ship within the Star Trek franchise. And then we'll do the Star Wars one. I'm going to tell you, like the Star Wars one I'm doing last because who knows, I might watch, Solo: A Star Wars Story and say, holy shit, that's the coolest ship I've ever seen, whatever happens to be in that movie. And I have the technical guides that I pre-ordered and they're arriving on the 25th anyway. It'll be good to be like really up to date on the latest movie as far as ships available for Star Wars. Even though my Star Wars top 8, I could rattle it off pretty fast, at least the one right now, and it's a hard pick, it's a tall order. That's what I want to say, not a hard pick. It's a tall order that something in a new movie could somehow bust into that top 8 because, man, my top 8 hasn't changed much in a long time. In fact, I'll give you a little preview. What's number 1? I'll tell you what number 1 is, and most people that know me could probably guess, and it is canon once again, thankfully. But my number 1 pick's going to be the TIE Defender. I just love that fucking ship. That's the ship of dreams when it comes to Star Wars for me. So, but admittedly, some stuff from Rogue One broke into my top 8. So anyway, but we're not here to talk about Star Wars. We're here to talk about Star Trek this time around. And so we're going to break into the top 8. In fact, I'm also going to be giving you, I asked the lovely and hyper-intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy, the boss, I asked her, hey, what's your favorite ship, like in Star Trek? And I also asked, of course, the inimitable Ellen Stallone, asked her, what she thought. And so I'll be giving those to you at the end. I'm not exactly this like a lot of top 8s. There won't exactly be like a number 1. Like I don't know that I have like a full-on number 1 like that there is that's just the best ever or something. There might be one ship in here that I maybe would claim to be my number 1, but really these are just my 8 favorite, and they're all for varying reasons. So it's tough to even like rank them within themselves. Okay. But anyway, why waste time? You know the score. You know how these work. Let's get into it. Let's start talking about them. And we'll open up with the first one, which is actually the most futuristic of the bunch. In fact, I look to my right, and there's a little model of one of these guys, and that is the Wells class vessels. Now, a lot of times I'll just bring up the class. I'm not necessarily going to mention the ship unless it's really important, and sometimes it is important, so I will say when it's specifically the ship. But the Wells class we experienced, these are 29th century ships. I mean, that futuristic. We experienced them through Star Trek Voyager, and particularly the USS Relativity, which is a great name. So, and I love the idea of the Wells class, obviously named after H.G. Wells. But the name of the episode from Voyager is also Relativity. It had to do with the character of Captain Braxton and all this, which that's kind of became a thread throughout Star Trek Voyager. But I love the Wells class ships. They look so they're Federation ships, they're Starfleet ships. They are so different in design and look. They look like an arrow. They really literally look like an arrowhead, or like almost like a spearhead or something. They don't have the saucer section. They don't even have the what looks like warp nacelles at all. It has none of that. This is a very unique ship for Starfleet. It's a wholly new design, and I think it's really fucking cool. I think it's damn cool. And it's not even so a ship that could have made this list, even though it really shouldn't, because A, we don't know if it's really canon, or B, whether it Yeah, well, I guess the canon part is the big question, even though it is in an episode, but whether it was actually like a real ship or it was just some kind of flight of fancy that Daniels showed off to Captain Archer. But there was the Enterprise J, which I think is from the 26th century. In fact, I can look over, and there's a model of the Enterprise J, too, right on in the BDSM studios here. But anyway, like that ship looked, wow, that's very futuristic, and it looks futuristic. If you had the Star Trek The Next Generation technical manual from the 90s, at the end of that book, they talked about the Enterprise E, and they were talking about the Nova class, and that there was a bunch of different designs for the Nova class. One of the designs for the Nova class from like 1990, we're talking like 1991 or 92 when that book came out. One of the designs for the Nova class looks exactly like the Enterprise J. So it still looks like a Starfleet ship, right? And it's still an idea that had kind of been around, even though Doug Drexler, when he said that he designed the Enterprise J, he said he wasn't inspired by that little Enterprise E design, which those ship designs would get used later on, like an actual Nova class would come out that looked like one of those. But anyway, this, you know, the USS Relativity or the Wells class vessels just look wildly different from anything that Starfleet has pretty much ever had. I mean, wildly different. And they're very, I mean, for lack of a better term, they're very sharp. Like it's a gorgeous ship, has that really cool, it looks like those Oakley windbreakers from the 90s, you know, where it has the kind of the holographic, like the multicolor design, you know, going along it, even though it's kind of a purple. And these are really obviously very powerful ships. But one thing that's interesting about them, and I didn't know about this until I actually got the model of it, but these are very small ships. I think there's something like 186 meters, which I think makes it, like, puts it on par with like the NX class, like the NX-01 Enterprise, smaller than Voyager, I think, if I remember correctly. I mean, these are tiny. It's certainly smaller than the Constitution class. These are tiny ships, which is kind of cool. And like, if you look them up online, there's a lot of artwork for them, and usually they have them moving in like fleet action, and they just look badass. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. They really are badass. So, but they are time ships as well. That's why they have the names Wells class and obviously USS Relativity in reference to the theory of relativity. They are time ships that themselves can travel through time, you know, can go backward and forward in time. But they also have temporal transporters on board, which allows them to just beam people back into time. They don't have to actually send the whole ship back into time. It does have a sensor suite that allows for monitoring of different points within the space-time continuum and all that, which is really interesting. Has one major forward disruptor, not even phaser, disruptor, that, I mean, that's part of what gives it its pointedness. And I think that's pretty cool, because that reminds me of the future from All Good Things, the futuristic or the future Enterprise D, where it has that one big gun underneath, and also that's the same design that ended up getting used for the IDW comic book series from the Mirror Universe for the Next Generation, Star Trek: The Next Generation Mirror Broken. So yeah, the Relativity, I mean, really cool. And I also, the other thing I love about the Relativity, I love the Starfleet uniforms from the 29th century, but I love the controls. I've talked about these controls many times. The controls, it looks like LCARS, right? Except they give it a different name, like TL cars or something like that. It looks like the LCARS design that you're used to on, you know, say like a Galaxy class ship or something from Voyager or DS9. But the controls themselves are operated with circular motions, almost like if you were handling an iPod, like a classic iPod, an iPod Classic, where it has a circular motion. And I think that looks so slick. And for what they're doing, granted, it's what you would call cinemagenic, where it looks good on screen, and you know, and it functions as it should based upon what the storyline needs. But I think, I say this a lot, we're missing something by getting away from those kinds of controls, where everything's just a touchpad and you get away from those kinds of motions. I think that's really, really interesting stuff. So I love the controls. There's just not a part of the Wells class that I don't love. I mean, right down to the you know, right down to the control scheme inside the ship. Really, really cool. And it has, I'm trying to think exactly what they called them, because they're not holodecks. Like they have they have literal entire decks that, you know, that are like a holodeck, but I mean, they're massive. But anyway, I think that's really cool. You know, that it has, the holomatrix, that's what they're called. Which is their version of a holodeck, and obviously far more advanced. So really cool ship, particularly because of how advanced it is, no doubt about that. But anyway, yeah, so that's the Wells class. Started off with that. Let's go on to the next one. And, of course, that was from the 29th century. But now let's go way back into the past. Like, how about the 22nd century? And I got to go with the NX class. The NX class, I remember when TV Guide, so this would have been 2001, something like that, when Enterprise was being announced as the new Star Trek show, okay, Star Trek Enterprise. And TV Guide got the first look, and they even made it a little like pull-out poster that you could tear and pull it out of the NX-01 and what it would look like. Everybody was really excited about this Star Trek because it was supposed to be Star Trek that was different. And it was a prequel show before prequel shows were a big deal, before prequel movies and things like that, other than Star Wars, were something. And, I mean, there was so much excitement around Enterprise. You got to understand. I mean, it was really, really something. And the ship, I just thought, it was like, wow, that looks so cool. Now, it does look similar to, is it the Akira class, or it's like the Steamrunner class upside down. So there have been ships that look similar to it in the past, but the way that it came out, and just kind of the simple design, even though you saw the cues of what would later be Starfleet ships, I love it. And I love the interior design, just like I loved with the Wells class, is really slick. I like that insight where it feels more like a submarine. I like that within the NX class. Just beautiful, beautiful ships, and whenever it would go into battle, not that I cared so much for season 3, which was the entire Expanse storyline with the Xindi War. Whenever it would go into battle, like the way it would move and that it could flip and everything, I mean, it had a really good looking design, as to where the Galaxy class and things like that never looked so maneuverable. This thing looked like it could go kick some ass in a way. Like the way that it could move, how quickly it could move, how it could turn and all that. Or even, another awesome moment was when they were, I think it was the NX-01 Enterprise and the NX-02 Columbia. They had to join the ships. I'm trying to remember what exactly the reason was. And so they just flew, one was flying upside down, even though in space there's no upside down. One was cruising upside down. The other was cruising right side up. And I don't know, it just looked cool, like the way that these ships could intermingle. And that was another nice thing too. Like I like how the NX-01 had a grappling hook instead of a tractor beam, and how it had actual ports that could dock with things. I mean, it was really cool to see kind of the progenitor technologies to everything that would just end up getting done with a force field of some kind later on, right? It did get the phasers too early. And people, like Scott Bakula and people that were actually a part of the show admitted that they came up with some advanced technologies way too quick. But that was cool, and it didn't have shields. They had to polarize the hull plating, right? A lot of that, the antiquatedness to it gave it a certain charm that I really liked. Now, the thing I actually like better, and apparently this was part of its design, was supposedly if Enterprise was going to get a season 5, they would have done a refit of the NX-01 to where it looked a little, or maybe significantly different. Actually, I can say it looks significantly different. Kind of like how, you have the Constitution class from the original series, and then you get that major refit that you end up with in Star Trek: The Motion Picture that most people, remember the Enterprise as. And this, not unironically, just about everything on this list, I have I have some kind of model of, okay? But I have it. Doug Drexler, he finished the design for, I think they called it the Columbia class refit, was what they ended up calling it, for when they would do the refit for the NX-01. And in fact, in the novelizations from Simon & Schuster for Enterprise that are still running, that have taken place after the end of the show, they have refitted the Enterprise to where what it now has a secondary hull where that tubular thing the tubular shape at the bottom of, say, like a Constitution class ship. Now it has one of those. It's not just flat anymore with just the saucer section and the two engines hanging off the back. It has an actual secondary hull, and it looks so cool. You got to check it out. Maybe I'll put it in for the artwork for the show here. But I think that's beautiful. And Doug Drexler, the designer, he pretty much said that was always in mind, that eventually they would keep adding on parts to the Enterprise to where it would start looking more to the NX-01, to where it would start looking more and more like the ships that you would know more, say, in the 23rd century. I think that might be, if the Columbia class refit of the NX-01, if that were canon, and if that were used on screen and all that, like I would dare say that that's actually the most beautiful version of the Enterprise out there. Like, it looks that good, and it seems right. It's amazing when you add that secondary hull, just how right it looks, and so I don't think Doug Drexler is bullshitting when he said, no, this was always the idea, was to eventually get it to that point. And yeah, damn, does it work? I really think it does. So yeah, the NX class and its Columbia class refit, that's we'll say number 2 on our list here. So we're 2 down. Let's go to number 3. Number 3. Okay, this. Now, there's a couple different names for this thing. Sometimes, like say if you get the model or whatever, it's called the Bajoran Solar Sailor. I think technically in the show, and if you look for it in Encyclopedia and other areas, it's called the Bajoran Lightship. This thing is stunning. Ellen actually reminded me when we were going to do our when we did a Star Trek update, I think in March, and we were doing the top 8, it ended up being top 3 actually, top 3 Deep Space Nine episodes. She reminded, when we were having lunch, she reminded me of this episode, the episode called Explorers from Deep Space Nine, where Jake Sisko and Ben, and Commander Captain Ben Sisko, Sisko builds this. He rebuilds this ancient, like, Bajoran style ship called a lightship, which has these huge solar sailors and, is effectively like a clipper ship for the stars. Like, that's the basic idea of it. And a lot of it is literally made out of wood. There's all these, it's really interesting. And the whole episode is him, just going on his journey with his son, to do something fun and trying out this lightship. And it's so cool. When it opens up, it's gorgeous. And I've talked about it before in previous episodes, but the romanticism, this is a very romantic vessel. It's one deck, and it's all mechanical. Like, it's all mechanical. There's no real computer on it. They use kind of these old, almost like sextants and everything to be able to, navigate the stars and all that, using old star maps, like literal physical maps that you roll out and all this shit. I just love that. And the fact that it's a spaceship. Now, what's really cool is that in the episode, they claim the Bajorans had these in the 16th century, our time in the 16th century. And, of course, you find out in the episode Explorers that they actually made it as far as a Bajoran lightship had made it as far as Cardassia, which the Cardassians finally admitted since Sisko ended up making it to Cardassia pretty much with his Bajoran lightship, even though it was an accident. And that's the thing, is that you find out that with if a Bajoran lightship, because they're not warp capable vessels, okay, but if a Bajoran lightship encountered a tachyon eddies, it could actually achieve warp drive, and it could survive the journey of going at a certain, I don't know about high warp, but a certain warp speed. So again, that's really cool. I love the idea, no computers, none of that horse shit. You're going out into space, and you're powered by the sun, or by the stars, I should say, not the sun. You're powered by the stars, and away you go, and everything's just really basic. And I think it's very romantic. I love that ship to death. It's such a gorgeous design. In fact, even the guys that designed it and a lot of the writers for the show said, man, how can we figure out how to use this thing again? Because they loved it too. It's a stunning design. It could easily, honestly, it could take my number 1 spot as far as ships go. Like, if I were to really create a number 1, because it's totally memorable. Even if you've only seen like the episode once, like I'm sure Ellen only saw the episode once, and like it just sticks in your mind because it is so stunning to look at. And I have a little model of it behind me, and it's beautiful. So, but all right, well, let's move on to the next ship. And as far as being number 1, well, this is the one that if I really had to pare down, I'd probably end up saying is the number 1, and that would be, well, you guessed it, the Constitution class, okay, and particularly, of course, the Enterprise, but the Constitution class, and more specifically, I think even its refit. Like, I think I talked about this. I think I talked about this in episode 278, the Prime episode 278 of Sovereign Tech, where I said, like, there's the scene in the motion picture where they're doing like kind of this beauty pass, okay, of where it's like 6 minutes long, where Scotty's has Kirk in a shuttle and they're going around the refitted Enterprise. Okay, NCC 171. They're flying around it. Like, I cry when I see that because it's just so beautiful. It's so stunning. It's such a glorious shot. I love that ship. Like, and it's the same design that would end up being used for, obviously, the NCC 1701A. But, yeah, the Constitution class, and particularly its refit, just stunning. Just so gorgeous. And I think it sticks in your mind because, well, the battle with Khan is legendary. But more so because it looked... it took Star Trek from the original series, it took it from the cheesy effects of the original series. Of course, now you watch them and they have enhanced effects, and the original Constitution class looks great. But it took you from that to something that looks so real. And so I think it just sticks in your mind as, okay, no, that looks real. That looks like that could be out there in space. That's awesome. And it really, again, it just sticks with you. And it does have that classic Starfleet design that everything else, we kind of imagine every other ship is based upon. So the refitted Constitution class, particularly, even though the original Constitution class, I love that too. Gotta give that. If again, it's number 4 that we've covered so far. But if I had to choose a number 1, it would probably be that. It's just so beautiful. If I was just basing it upon class and not basing it upon it being the Enterprise, right? But especially like in Star Trek 6. Like, the design language inside the ship is really beautiful. I love all the colors and everything, and the schematics and all that. I mean, it's great. Even though I like the bridge as well in Star Trek: The Motion Picture and Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3. I love that. I mean, and that's another thing too. Star Trek 3 is like such a badass adventure with the Constitution class. That makes it stick out in your mind as well. So anyway, there's our number 4. Let's go to a number 5 here. And this is a ship that, well, I'll explain why this is in my top 8. It's the Burrell-class bird of prey. Now, the Burrell-class bird of prey is the smaller bird of prey, also from Star Trek 3, but would be used endlessly in other Star Trek properties. The Burrell-class bird of prey, yeah, again, really tiny, usually only has a 12 to 14-person crew. It's what was used in Star Trek 4 as well. What I love about it is... And in fact, in Deep Space Nine, like Gul Dukat actually does end up doing this. It's like it just seems to be the workhorse of the galaxy. Like, if you have like a rebel party, not even Klingons. I mean, it's a Klingon ship, okay. But even if you're not Klingons, like usually it seems like people can buy a bird of prey if they want, and it has a cloaking device and all that. And the wings, the way that the wings move on it, are so cool. And you have the blasters the disruptors, I guess, mounted on the ends of each of them. And then you have that long forward neck. It's such a cool, very unique design. Such a cool looking ship. I mean, it instantly sticks out in your mind. But I love the kind of mercenary attitude of it, or the rebellious attitude of it. Like, not just Klingons would have it. Anybody could have one of these, and you have yourself a fairly powerful ship, with a cloaking device and all the rest of it. And growing up, when I would write a lot of fan fiction for Star Trek, I would use a bird of prey a lot as like the vessel for, say, a renegade crew that I created or something. And so, yeah, the Burrell class bird of prey always tops. I mean, that's an easy one to top anybody's list because it is, and it's so uniquely Star Trek, right? Like, when you think Star Wars, you think, TIE fighters and X-Wings, right? Bird of preys are comparable to that, where you just instantly know that's Star Trek. I did like, also, side note, I really liked the bird of prey from Enterprise that the Augments used. I thought that was a really, really fun little design. And I really liked the bird of prey from Star Trek Into Darkness that almost looked like, it was like a winged beetle more than it was a bird. Like, it had the back part that almost looked like a yellow jacket that could kind of curl up and everything. I have a model of that actually, just above me here. But I think they called it like the D4 or something, the D4 bird of prey. I thought that was a really cool design too. Birds of prey the bird of prey, even the Romulan one's cool, but the bird of prey, instantaneously recognizable design. Even the Cavort class is fine, which is the much larger version that's like the size of a Galaxy class ship. There's no way it couldn't make this list. So, all right, let's go on to number 6. And number 6, here's where we're going to, we got one that might not surprise, but here's where we're going to get into a couple of oddities. Number 6, I am actually going to give to the Valkyrie class fighter. Now, this is, what the hell's that? This is a Starfleet ship that was from a game, and so not exactly canon. Not that would stop me from putting something on this list, because there's something else on here that isn't exactly canon. But this is from the game Star Trek Invasion, which came out for PlayStation and PlayStation only in 2000, in the year 2000. In the year 2000, right? But Star Trek Invasion was made by Warthog Games, the game itself, which those are the people behind what I consider one of the gay's good, one of the greatest game trilogies of all time, that being Colony Wars. They made that, which they are space simulator games, and this Star Trek Invasion was a space simulator game where you had you were in little like 1 or 2 person fighter vessels that you use. So it played kind of like Colony Wars, or like TIE Fighter, like Star Wars TIE Fighter, or X-Wing, or things like this. A lot of it you're like Free Space or Wing Commander, but it was the Star Trek version of it. And so they had to come out with their own little ship for that. And so they ended up creating what's called the Valkyrie class. Now within that, you have like 4 different types. There's the Type 1 Valkyrie, Type 2, Type 3, and then there's also the Type 3A, and the Type 3s end up looking very, very different than the original Type 1. I think the Type 1 looks really cool. It looks a lot like Nova Squad, or what is it? Not Nova Squad. Was it Red Squadron from the Academy at Starfleet Academy, where they had those ships that Wesley was a part of, and they did that burst, whatever. Anyway. Yeah, you know the episode I'm talking about. Look kind of like that, and it's it's a 1-person. I think one of the models might be like a 2-seater, but really, really slick looking design. And they would end up having various weapon systems on them, like Type 10 phasers and everything, and they'd have little shields and nose mounted Type 9. I mean, they have all these different abilities that were really cool. But you never really had, other than I can think of maybe like 20, 30 years ago, like in Diane Duane's Star Trek books, like Dreadnought, right? Where you did have what is effectively a Starfleet starfighter. You never really got that in Star Trek. And so it was really cool to finally have it. And I thought that it worked. I mean, I get it. The only reason they came up with them is because it fit in with the space simulator gaming genre. Okay. But I'm glad that they did it. I thought it turned out cool. I even liked, there was what is it called? The Typhon, the USS Typhon was the ship that Worf was in command of, and that launched all of the Valkyrie fighters from it. And the Typhon class, like Picard talks about it in the beginning of the game, he calls it a mobile outpost and carrier starship. Like, I thought that was a really cool idea, where it's a starship that effectively would stop somewhere and almost act like a space station and just kind of sit there. It wasn't meant to be highly maneuverable, and it used the Valkyrie class as its main, attack form. I really, really like, I wish... I mean, they've kind of hinted at it at other points, and like the Romulans have a Scorpion, which are like starfighters, effectively. There's been hints of starfighters within Star Trek itself, but this is definitely the most fleshed out, and of course you get to pilot them yourself, so how could you not love it? So I really, really like the Valkyrie class fighter. The Type 1 as far as design, but as far as ability, I mean, obviously the Type 3A, the more advanced it gets, the better. But the Type 1, I think, had the best look, in my opinion. The Type 3 looked weird. The Type 3 almost looked like a Jem'Hadar ship, which that was a cool design too, kind of that beetle design. I did like that. So, all right, let's go on to number 7 here. And this is the Danube class Runabout. Of course, these were made famous on Star Trek Deep Space Nine, would also end up getting used from season 6 onward in Star Trek The Next Generation. These are the literal workhorses of Starfleet. They are Starfleet's bird of prey. And I think that's unconsciously why I've always really liked them. They're modular. You can put in different modules into them to do different things. Like when you see them on The Next Generation, they have like really impressive dining and living quarters in the back end of them, as to where on Deep Space Nine, maybe they'd have more scientific equipment in the back of them or whatever. I love these things because, they're not full-on starships. It's a very small crew. It's another ship that, honestly, in a lot of fan fiction that I would write, I would use. And part of it was because I didn't have to write effectively, 100 to 200 characters within it, okay, or 400 characters. Like, I didn't have to imagine that there was this massive crew. And it's a lot easier when you make your world kind of smaller in this way. I mean, you can have a gigantic galaxy, but when you have a smaller world that you're interplaying in, like on the bridge or in the back of a runabout, it's great for a writer. So I loved it for that reason, but also I just thought that they were really cool. And when in Deep Space Nine, when you'd see them flying in formation and one runabout's picking up another runabout and all that. I don't know. I think they're such cool looking ships. And in fact, I also liked what people kind of consider the progenitor to the runabout, which is the Sydney class, which if you read Star Trek Forbidden Frontiers, if you read the short fiction that I've been releasing for that, that has so far, or one of the main ship within that has been a little Sydney class, which was made popular in the episode Relics that Scotty came from with the USS Jenolan. You'd also end up seeing the Sydney class in Deep Space Nine. But yeah, that was kind of like a proto runabout. So I love that idea of the smaller ship within Star Trek and within Starfleet itself, where it's a much smaller crew, maybe single digits to few double digits, and but they're fairly powerful and fast. Like the Sydney class. I remember in the episode Relics, it was really cool because Geordi says, man, he says or he doesn't say man, but he says at impulse power, this thing could give a Galaxy class a run for its money. Like it could outmaneuver it in a heartbeat. And I love that kind of idea, almost like that hot rod mentality that you could get with these kinds of things. I really dig that. So yeah, number 7, got to give it to the runabout. Such a classic design now. And also what's nice about it was a design that didn't follow, much like the Valkyrie as well, frankly, the Valkyrie class fighters. They're designs that don't follow the Federation design language. It kind of looks like a shuttle, but it's supposed to be more or less a starship. It has its own registry number. But it doesn't have the, I like the saucer section fine, but I also like a lot of variety. And so it's cool to see that, that kind of variety. Just like it's one of the reasons I really love all of the Vulcan ships that you eventually end up seeing, thanks to Enterprise, and so on. Because of those, where it's like, the warp engine is this circle, that pretty much sits within something. I mean, it almost looks like a penis and a vagina. Like that's the way that the Vulcan ships look like, which I think there's something to that. I think that's interesting that it has almost like a sexual motif, because I think Vulcans are inherently actually very sexual. And that's been hinted at in expanded media or mediums within Star Trek. And yeah, like I'm thinking it, well, never mind, I won't go there. But Vulcan love slave, baby. Woo. So I've always liked that. The Vulcan ships could have made, any of them, because there's a few different designs that we have now, could have made this list pretty easily, because they do have such a unique look and logical look, because they're cylindrical, which is the best kind of shape that you want going into, for a ship to go into space. So you don't want like a UFO, you don't want it circular, you actually want it to be a cylinder. But anyway, let's move on to, and then we'll get into the ladies' picks here. Let's go on to number 8, which is the last from my list. And this is one I've talked about a few times at various points. So this is non-canon. I mean, the class is canon, but the ship itself is non-canon. And this is going to be the time where I'm actually going to pick a specific ship. This is from the book by William Shatner. It was a sequel to the wildly popular Ashes of Eden. Okay, the book was called The Return, which takes place directly after Star Trek Generations. And what happens is you find out Kirk gets captured by the Borg, and he gets reanimated by the Borg, and he's alive. And throughout the bulk of the of William Shatner's Star Trek books, it is like a whole series that people call the Shatnerverse, where it is Kirk in the 24th century. And they're just some of the best, if not the best, Star Trek books ever written. I love them to death. The Return is definitely, I think, the best. Ashes of Eden and The Return are the best of the bunch. But The Return is really cool for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of amazing moments in that, all of which I can't cover here. But there's a Defiant class ship in The Return that ends up getting, not commandeered, but ends up getting repurposed to go on a specific mission with the crew of the Next Generation to effectively find Kirk. And it ends up being captained by Ambassador Spock, which that is so cool. Again, we're talking about a Defiant class here. This 24th century. So, but the interesting thing is that the point that they make in the book is that you can't, only the USS Defiant, okay, the NX, what is it, 74656, or wait, no, that's Voyager, sorry. Anyway, the Defiant from DS9, that's the only ship of the Defiant class that can actually have a cloaking device. That's the claim, right? And that was originally supposed to be a thing in Star Trek, even though I think they kind of worked around that eventually, because you're supposed to have that Romulan officer on board the ship all the time, which I thought they dropped the ball on not having her there. But anyway, so other Defiant class ships couldn't have cloaking devices, but Starfleet still wanted them to be very stealthy, heavily armed and and underpowered vessels, which is one of the reasons I like the Defiant class, because talk about that hot rodding attitude. The Defiant class definitely has that, where it's this little ship with just, the power of a ship, 10 times its size, which I think is really cool. But so specifically the Defiant class in the Return was called the USS Monitor. That was obviously named after the Monitor and the Merrimack, right, from the Civil War, from the American Civil War. But so the USS Monitor, instead of having a cloaking device, what it had was micro diffracted carbon painting, like a coat of micro diffracted carbon, which the carbon would absorb all visible radiation that fell upon the ship. So it looked like the ship was just black as night, black as space. So like you effectively couldn't see it, but it wasn't actually a cloaking device. You just really couldn't see it, and that would probably fuck with some sensors, because some sensors would be based upon radiation. That was really cool. It also, they ended up like putting a transwarp drive in it and everything. I mean, once again, it's the Defiant class getting hot rodded, which is what I love about it. But yeah, I really love the USS Monitor. In the book The Return, they ended up temporarily renaming it to the USS Enterprise, NCC 1701E, before we knew what the NCC 1701E would be. But this is before First Contact came out. And yeah, it's just such a cool ship, and it does such a great job, like against the Borg in the book and everything else that it comes encountered with. I love the USS Monitor specifically, the way that they talk about it, and more so than the Defiant that we know of from Deep Space Nine, even though I love that ship too. But the USS Monitor, like that idea of it just being like all black, I just think that's so slick. Really, really, really slick. It's definitely something, that whole, micro diffracted carbon paint job is something I'm probably going to implement in Forbidden Frontiers somehow, even though Star Trek Forbidden Frontiers takes place in the 23rd century instead of the 24th. So yeah, got to give it to the USS Monitor. Such a cool ship. And it actually makes, like, it comes back. It's not just in the Return. Shatner uses it again, and I think eventually it does get destroyed, if I remember correctly. But there it is. Okay, so there's my top 8. I'll recover it quickly. The Wells class, of course, the USS Relativity. The NX class, which everybody remembers is the NX-01 from Star Trek Enterprise, particularly the refit that Doug Drexler did. Like I said, you want to look that up if you've never seen it. The Bajoran Lightship from Deep Space Nine, the episode Explorers, which I just love, and then the Constitution class, and particularly its refit that we would experience in the movies, and that the NCC 1701A would be. The Burrell class bird of prey, the smaller one, even though the bigger ones, it's all the same design. It looks beautiful. The Valkyrie class fighters from Star Trek Invasion, and then the Runabout from Deep Space Nine, the Danube class, and then we have the USS Monitor, which is a Defiant class ship, but doesn't have the cloaking device. Instead, has the micro diffracted carbon plating or painting on it, along with other stuff. Transwarp drive and all these crazy weapons and everything is really cool. So there's my top 8. But why don't I let's give a little bonus here, okay? And this will round it up to 10. Give you a little bonus. Stephanie and Ellen's favorite ship. So I'll tell you Stephanie's first. Stephanie's is actually the Defiant. Okay, so she loved, and specifically, I think, the Defiant, and I'll explain why. So I asked her, she's like, oh yeah, I love the Defiant. Yeah, well, first off, she's like, yeah, I don't pay that much attention to the design so much and everything, which I get it. That's more, that's something I've had a love affair with. It's the design of these ships. That's why I can do a top 8 about them. But I totally understand that. So, but she loved the Defiant, and in her reasoning, where she loves that it has a cloaking device, which, man, that's a conversation those are such classic conversations that we would have at conventions back in the day, is, the Treaty of Eldron, right? Like, why can't Starfleet ships have cloaking devices? This is stupid. In the episode Pegasus, which that ship could have made it, the actual USS Pegasus, they had the phase cloak on it. Okay, that episode of The Next Generation, where Admiral Pressman is saying, we've been behind the times for so long, all because of a stupid treaty. Why don't we? Our enemies have a tactical advantage. Why don't we have cloaking devices? And they ended up putting a cloaking device on a ship of, what is it, the Oberth class, like the USS Grissom from Star Trek 3. I love those ships too, because that's another one where it looks very different from anything else that Starfleet does. Really, really dig the Oberth class. But anyway, that had the phase cloak and everything, and that would be the argument that we'd always have. And I was always on the side, of course Starfleet should have cloaking devices. What the hell? So Stephanie obviously feels the same way. So she loves the Defiant, the fact that it has a cloaking device. And again, we don't exactly know that all Defiant class ships would have cloaking devices. So we're specifically talking about the USS Defiant. And she said a term, because it was late at night when she was telling me about it. And Stephanie says, she goes, "It's Slexy." And I was like, Slexy? And then what she meant to say was, she was going to say it's slick, and she was going to say it's sexy. And so she put the two terms together, and she ended up just saying Slexy. And I was like, whoa, that's brilliant. I mean, she's brilliant anyway. She comes up with all these great terms all the time, like PPA, right? Which we talked about in episode 278, which is your peaceful privacy arsenal. But Slexy. So she said it's Slexy. I agree. It is. It's a sexy looking ship. It looks very different from the rest of Starfleet ships. It is slick, kind of that. It's kind of like the NX-01, where it has this very smooth, one layer design, where it's not like a bunch of different, a primary hull, secondary hull, and all that. Very maneuverable. Of course, you can think of how it was flying in Star Trek First Contact, the beginning of that, or even in some episodes of Deep Space Nine, where it's just maneuvering and flying through ships and everything. I mean, just crazy maneuverable. And that leads to what I think might be one of the other reasons that Stephanie likes the Defiant particularly, is who's always sleeping on the Defiant? Whose quarters are on the Defiant? Worf. And Stephanie loves Worf. So, and having the Klingon in charge of that ship, I mean, that definitely does something for you. And again, just think of Star Trek First Contact. That was really cool. But yeah, her when I kept asking her, I was like, "Is there anything else you want to say about it?" She just said, about the Defiant. She said, "It's transgressive," and I'm like, "Wow, okay." I mean, it is a badass ship. There's no doubt about that. The Defiant class in general is badass. The USS Defiant itself is really badass, just like the USS Monitor that I mentioned before. So it's a great pick. It's a totally solid pick. I remember the Deep Space Nine technical manual that came out in the 90s. I read the shit out of that, and most of the time I was reading about the Defiant and everything that could do, because it's so damn cool. So that's a great choice. But anyway, let's move on to the last pick here. And of course, this one is coming from Ellen, and here we go. So when I asked Ellen about it, she actually said, she's like, "Well, does a space station count?" And I was like, "Yeah, definitely. Sure. What the hell, There's some space stations that I love within Star Trek history, including ones in books like Vanguard and all that, or was it the K7 station from Trouble with Tribbles? I think that's really beautiful. I've been half tempted at times to get models of that. And of course, that also appeared in Trials and Tribulations, and I think it was also referenced in an episode of Discovery, that particular station, like Deep Space K7 or something like that was the name of it. Anyway, space station counts all the way. So initially she wanted to go to the space station, but I'll save that. No, you know what? I will tell you about that pick. So, because ironically, she picked Deep Space Nine, and she loved it. Part of the reason she loved it was because of the USS Defiant, which, she said allowed them to do a little spacefaring here and there, which agreed, the runabout, it's kind of funny. So Deep Space Nine was a major part of all of our picks. Stephanie's favorite ship was the USS Defiant. One of my top ships is the runabout, and, Ellen loved the station itself. So that's kind of... Between the three of us, we all ended up picking pretty much Deep Space Nine, which I think is cute. But anyway, she says, her exact words on the matter is that DS9 is the perfect location. I'd say wormhole to another part of the universe, which houses non-corporeal aliens, brings novelty and variety as far as adventuring goes, and has amazing defensive systems. All true. Stanley breaking in there. Though it doesn't travel except around Bajor, there are constant visitors and travelers from all parts of space that bring vibrancy to it. And of course, it wouldn't be complete without the USS Defiant to allow for a little spacefaring. So that's a great pick. I mean, Deep Space Nine, I have a little model of Deep Space Nine up above me. Definitely, I mean, one of the, Stephanie actually talked about this when we did the Star Trek update, where we did the top 3 episodes of Deep Space Nine, where she just loved the design of the station, and she even loved the episode that was about I think there's a couple of them about Empok Nor, which was the sister station to Deep Space Nine. So that, I mean, totally a great pick, you know. And there's so much to like about Deep Space Nine, kind of the frontier aspect of it, as Dr. Bashir would say. I think that's a great pick, you know, on Ellen's part all the way. And it's true. I think with, you know, setting like matters with a space station, right? Because it's not really going to go anywhere other than, yes, Deep Space Nine did move kind of, you know, closer to the wormhole, to the Denorius belt than it was originally to Bajor. So it did, you know, kind of move. It could move around that area a little bit. So the area matters. And I mean, yeah, having the Bajoran wormhole there and Bajor there, I mean, that's all, I don't know, that's all pretty cool. I mean, and those are important factors when considering. Yeah, I should have thought about that. I should have thought of fucking star bases. Because, you know, I'll tell you something that would have made that could have, if I thought about star bases, I might have put Yorktown Station on this list, because that is, when you're watching Star Trek Beyond and the Yorktown Station, you know, when you do that big sweep and Michael Giacchino's music comes on, that is one of the most beautiful, epic fucking moments in Star Trek history. I love it when that happens. I mean, Yorktown Station was so stunning. I mean, it didn't look, well, from the outside, it looks very futuristic, right? You know, the way people are dressed and all this other stuff, it didn't feel as futuristic as, say, you know, stuff that was done, you know, like with, I don't know, any show that took place in the 24th century or in the original series itself. But Yorktown Station was absolutely stunning. And, oh, shit, you know, now that gets me, God damn it. The Franklin. I love the USS Franklin from Beyond. That should be on this list. That really should be on this list. I love that thing for a bunch of reasons. One is that it exists, like, it's a new starship that exists in both timelines, Prime and Kelvin. And also, like, I kind of like the fact that it's technically older than even the NX class, right? Because it was the first Warp 4 ship, as to where the NX class was the first Warp 5 ship. God damn it. This is so, see what I mean? This is so tough to pick all this stuff. There's so many awesome, there's so many badass ships, and I'm not even getting like half of the alien ones that are really cool. Like, I love the Gorn ship, now that they finally have one of those in the episode Arena from the original series. When they did the enhanced editions of the original series, they're like, okay, well, we get to actually put in a Gorn starship now because we're updating the special effects and everything. And I actually have a model of the Gorn ship right next to me. It's beautiful. Man, there's so many, it's tough to do a top 8. It really is. So while I'm doing bonuses, I guess I'm tossing out bonuses. But let me give you one more bonus. So, because at first I think Ellen thought that, well, you know, okay, I can't choose a space station if I have to choose a starship. She says she would go with the Enterprise NCC 1701D. The ability to split into a saucer and star drive sections is an amazingly nimble adaptation that is also unique to this ship as far as I know. Also, it looks spacious and suave as fuck. Yes. I agree. You know, I gotta admit, me personally, like, I get the point. And as far as the saucer separation, I don't think we've ever seen where another ship really does that. You know, like, it looked like there were parts of Voyager that could do that, but Voyager's big trick was that it could actually land on a planet, right? And there was, so if you watch Star Trek Continues, in that, you find out that the original Constitution class, in the very last episode, spoiler alert, that the Constitution class could actually do that. And I think there was a book, too. Was it Prime Directive? Or it might have been Prime Directive, where they put that in, that the saucer section on the Constitution class could, like, blow off the neck of the secondary hull. But I think, like, those aren't canon. So I think she's right. You know, that yeah, that's more or less the only one we've ever really seen do that. In fact, I would argue the Sovryn class probably can't do it because, or I mean, even the Galaxy class stopped doing it, right? Because for budget reasons or whatever else. But like the Sovryn class, which was the Enterprise E, you know, whenever they ran into trouble, they just started to, you know, get to your escape pods, right? Get the hell out. Or they take the captain's yacht or something like that. I mean, they never ever talked about saucer separation. That stopped being a thing, which is a shame because I think it's actually a really cool feature. Like, especially when you consider best of both worlds. Like a ship that could have made this list as well is the USS Prometheus. Another one I've got a model of. That one's actually hard to find, that model. But the Prometheus, you know, could split into what, like 4 ships? You know, and I mean, it turns into its own little fleet. And the Prometheus is, at the time, you know, during the time of Voyager, I think was the most advanced starship in Starfleet. And I mean, it's a really, really cool ship. But that ability, like you saw in Best of Both Worlds at the Borg, where, the saucer section could separate from the star drive section, and then you could, kind of attack from two vectors. Like, a lot of those things are really, really cool. Yeah, the Galaxy class overall, I mean, so, there used to be a joke back in the 90s that they used to call it like the Radisson in space. Okay, because it looked like, even on the outside, it looked very swank and curvy, and they thought it looked like a flying hotel. That used to be kind of the running joke as compared to the more rough and tumble, perhaps, of the like the 170A, like the Constitution class or the Constitution class refit. Yeah, like the outside of the Enterprise D, I mean, it is very like svelte, right? I mean, like it does have very smooth lines. In fact, there is a particular version I'm going to talk about in a second that I really, really like, but I'll get into that in a second. But the interior. Now, if we were to choose ships just on the interior, I'd probably go with with Ellen's pick here, because the interior of the 1701D is awesome. Like, it is so beautiful, and I mean, you just want to relax and do all kinds of other things. I mean, inside there, it's really, you go in those quarters. Oh my God, it's so hot. But yeah, spacious and suave as fuck. That is definitely the way to call it. I love that description that Helen gave. Yeah, so I totally understand the Galaxy class. In fact, one thing I liked about the Galaxy class, so when you had like the technical manual back in the 90s, I mentioned earlier, you would look at the end of it, like the kind of the conclusion of the technical manual, talked about how the Galaxy class ships were actually designed to last for like 100 years, which is pretty awesome to think about. And you're like, oh, well, what's it going to look like in 100 years? What updates are they going to do? Like, they talk about throughout the entire technical manual how you could change bridge modules, you could change all these different modules on it, and find out what it would look like. And in All Good Things, we finally got a hint of what exactly that could mean. And in the All Good Things, which is the last episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, you get a look at a potential future Enterprise D that is the flagship of Admiral William T. Riker. And this thing is fucking badass. It has a cloaking device. It can, what Riker says, warp 13 or whatever, even though I know there's questions about the warp scale when you get to like warp 10. It has the third nacelle, and it has that giant fucking phaser underneath the saucer section, which makes it look like it can't actually do saucer separation anymore. But man, so now there was a game that came out, probably like 15 years ago, something like that. Maybe it was less than that. There was a game called Birth of the Federation. It was an okay game. In that, you can actually build, you can build the, like the Galaxy class starship with the 3 nacelles and the extra guns. And like, it's not just that. Like, I'm actually, I'm looking at the model here I got a couple days ago of the future Enterprise D. And it has like these, and the reason that I got it, because I love the fact that in the Next Generation Mirror Broken series, or in the Mirror of universe of the Next Generation, the Enterprise D in that is actually is the 3 nacelle type, but they just use that design, which I think is great to finally reuse that. But it has like little wings kind of coming down from the main nacelle pylons and everything. I mean, there's a lot of little hints done to it that are just great details. And I think for me, for all those people that joked about the Radisson in space, I think once you added on like that giant phaser on the bottom, I added on like kind of they're almost like spoilers. On the nacelles, and you add in that third nacelle and everything. I mean, that ship, it turns into a juggernaut, just a massive, massive ship. Now, in the game Birth of the Federation, you can build one of these, and what they call it they call it a Galaxy X class. So it's not just Galaxy class, but a Galaxy X class battlecruiser. And that has become a very popular name for it. So when people are talking about the future Enterprise D, a lot of people will just say the Galaxy X class. And that way, when they say the X, you know what they're talking about. You're talking about the 3 nacelled, the 3 nacelled Galaxy class. And the Galaxy X class, I mean, could have easily made my list. I didn't have it make my list because, Ellen picked it, so what the hell? I'll let her run with it. But I'll add in the X class, the Galaxy X class, because the thing just looks so tough and looks so serious. And when you watch All Good Things and you have like that Klingon fleet that comes. And inside of like 8 shots from that big phaser, it's instantaneously cutting through the Klingon shields. It's cutting through the hull of the Klingon battle cruisers and everything. It's just blasting right through. And as soon as the Enterprise D decloaks, I remember when I saw that, was that like in 94? I'm 13 years old. And when the Enterprise D decloaks, and you knew it was the Enterprise D. Right, instantaneously, you knew that that's what they were bringing in. Even though it looks different, and it has the third nacelle and it's decloaking. My 13-year-old jaw is just like, what the fuck? Like, that was so awesome. Talk about the cavalry, the cavalry coming in, right? Holy shit. That's so cool. It was really, that was something. And that's when you really give some love to that Galaxy class. But yeah, a great choice. And like I said, the interior of the Galaxy class, I think, is unmatched. I think when you think Star Trek, most people today instantly think of the interior of the Galaxy class, and with good reason. It set the tone. It set the tone for what life is like in the 24th century. It really did, and it's beautiful. And like Ellen said, it's suave as fuck, right? So just awesome. So yeah, definitely the Galaxy class is or the NCC 1701D is a great pick. Even though we didn't get to spend, as far as with the movies and everything, we didn't get to spend a whole ton of time with the Enterprise E. I don't know, like, it's cool, but it feels a little too much like the Excelsior, like a cross between the Excelsior and Voyager, and I don't know, it didn't seem distinctive enough. That it's huge, right? But and the bridge didn't seem as comfy, as to where on the Galaxy class, on the 1701D, like the bridge, you could lean back in those chairs. How many porn movies, porn parodies of the Next Generation have we watched where, like, Troy and Crusher or whatever, like they're fucking right on the bridge and those beautiful leather seats, and it just looks like it's made to fuck on. Yeah, you could totally get your fuck on inside the 1701D. Yeah, that interior design is, I have to agree, my personal opinion, is unmatched. Like I said earlier, if we were to base the top 8 on interior design of starships, the 1701D would be my number 1 pick in a heartbeat too. Just absolutely. Like it's so hot in there. It's just swank, use that word again. But anyway, great picks all the way around. So let's wrap this up. There is your Sovryn top 8 with a few bonuses. There's always got to be a few bonuses, right? A little bonus mention here and there. And you've got another top 8 ships, as it were, coming out this month. You'll have the Star Wars picks coming out. And maybe I'll get the picks from, we'll see who I can get the picks from as far as Star Wars ships go. In fact, if you've got a pick, you can comment under this sound, and I'll mention it when I do the Star Wars top 8 starships, and then I'll bring it up when I record that episode. So, and but man, and very soon I will be seeing Solo: A Star Wars Story. Can't wait to do that. I'm going to be doing just the best people in the world. It's gonna be awesome. So, all right, but hey, what am I doing? We're talking about Star Trek here, for fuck's sake. Can't Star Trek just have its day? Well, it always has its day with me, because guess what, folks? And I know not everybody agrees with me, but Star Trek is objectively better than Star Wars. Woo! I will see all of you on the other side.